Hello, and welcome to Optimistic Wargaming. And today I want to talk about something a little bit different. You see, with the recent releases of the 40k 9th edition codexes of Space Marines and Necrons, I recently had a realisation about something. You see, with the latest releases, we now have faction terrain for pretty much every faction in Warhammer 40k, of some description. Fortifications ranging from the Sporicist all the way up to Tidewall Gunship. We have quite a lot of variety. They made me realise something. I think ever since Fortifications were first introduced into 40k, as something you could bring as part of your army, back in 2013 with the Stronghold Assault expansion, I think I can count on my hands the number of times I've seen somebody bring an actual fortification. So today I wanted to talk about why I think that is. Why is it that after all these editions and all these years, for some reason fortifications aren't anywhere near as popular, especially when compared to options such as Flyers and Lords of War, which also were introduced that same year. So just what are fortifications? Well, fortifications are a battlefield role within Warhammer 40k, which you can use to fill out attachments. These consist of scenery pieces that you can bring as part of your army and set up as part of your army, because, well, they're part of your army list. You pay points for them just as every other unit, and pretty much without that, they're pretty much the same as every other unit in Warhammer 40k, with the exception that they cannot hold objectives. This is one of the issues that I feel like Warhammer 40k has with terrain, and why people don't bring the fortifications. After all, you've got these valuable resources, you've got your points, you need to use them. Well, let's be honest, if it can't hold an objective, and therefore can't help you win the game, then it becomes immediately lower down on your priorities of things to bring. So let's talk about why you bring units in Warhammer 40k. Why do you look at a unit inside your army and go, I'm going to bring that? Well, apart from the rule of cool and, you painted it, it's yours, you own it and all that stuff, apart from those reasons which are honestly way more valid than any other reason, let's think about the fundamental points of a unit. I'd say there are about 5 roles that a unit fills within an army. You've got maneuverability, you've got objective holding, you've got defensive capabilities, you've got damage output, and finally, you've got support. Doesn't matter if a unit is particularly bad at that role, as long as that's the role that it's supposed to fill, you will still take it if you wish. For example, you've got Tyranid Gargoyles. They're a unit that's not particularly great, let's say, but at the same time, they're fast and they're good at holding objectives. They have a role within the list. Doesn't mean necessarily that they're good at that role, but they can fulfill it. So, even though they're rare to see, or at least in my experience they are, you can still see them being brought and people will still enjoy using them. So why isn't this the case with fortifications? Why are there so few that you see out there? So, when you take into account what I've already mentioned about fortifications, you can already remove 2 of those 5 factors. They cannot hold objectives, and for the most part, there's one unusual exception, they can't move. So already, they can't hold objectives and they can't maneuver very quickly. As a result, we have 3 remaining roles. So, how good are they at dealing damage, being defensive, which you'd imagine would be the main one, and finally, support abilities? Which of those 3 do they fill? So it's at this point that I should probably start talking about, well, the specific terrain features. What do they do? Well, as mentioned, almost every faction in the game now has terrain specific for it. Every Xenos faction has specific terrain, almost every Chaos faction has specific terrain, and most of the Imperial stuff does. Now, in this I'm not going to be talking about the Necron and Space Marine ones because they haven't been out for very long, I don't know much about them, so I can't research them. But you've got the ones that don't actually have profiles. So those include the Sister Battle Sanctum, you've got the Imperial Knight one that I didn't know existed at all until I started doing research for this video. You've got the Orc one, which is the same as the Knight one, but with slightly different wordings, I believe. You have the Nurgle tree, which is just ported over from Sigmar. You have the Khorne altar, which is again just ported over from Sigmar. All of those terrain features are completely indestructible. Oh, you've also got the Gene Stealer Cult one, you've got the drill. All of those are indestructible. So, that's an advantage, right? Defensively, they're great. Except, not really. Defensively, not being able to be attacked is kind of useless because, well, it means you can't utilise that defence. You can't use it for anything. So instead they just count as scenery. You can be on them and count as in cover, which is good because it means that, well, you can always have cover. Except, well, most boards probably will have scenery in your deployment zone. But anyway, let's go through them in details. So first of all, you've got the Citadel of Battle one. It doesn't have any offensive firepower, so you can remove the offensive thing as well as the defensive thing. So what's its support ability? Support ability is that it gives you an act of faith every turn. There are multiple ways to gain active faith in Citadel of Battle. For 1 a turn if you're nearby it, it's not worth it. The Knight and the Orc one provides you a buff if the vehicle that's next to it doesn't do anything. If you're playing Knights and your Knight isn't doing something every turn, what are you doing with that Knight? Same with the Orc one. So those two are a bit meh, so why would you ever take them? You've then got the Gene Stealer Cult Drill. The Gene Stealer Cult Drill is probably one of the nicer of this group. You can use it to, well, drill a hole. You can put stuff back into reserve using it. You can use it to do mortal wounds across the entire board with it. But is it worth the price for it? That's the question. Is it worth the damage output and the price for a unit like that? Or would I rather just bring another unit? I think for the price of it, you can bring roughly like 2 heavy weapon teams. I'm not entirely sure why you would specifically do that. It's a decent Vic building, but is it good? Is it worth not taking another unit for? And finally, you've got the Nurgle tree and the altar. Both of those are kind of have similar issues. Their major issue is that, well, the Nurgle tree requires you to have Nurgle demons within 7 inches of it, sure, for all of its effects. The problem is that, well, if it's in your deployment zone, it means you've got to stay next to it. And its buffs are all mostly defensive, with you giving you some maneuverability buffs if you're next to it. But if it's in your deployment zone, why do you need it to provide you with buffs? If you can run and charge next to it, cool, but if it's in my deployment zone, when will I ever be next to it and need to charge after running? It can happen, but it's not very common that it's going to happen. The Skull Altar has a very similar issue. For it to be, except it's got an even bigger problem, which is that for it to be active, you need to put a Khorne Demon on top of it. So not only do you need to activate its abilities, which have an AoE that's not really large enough to help from your deployment zone. I think it's a bonus attack to demons within 16, I want to say. Not bad. But you have to pay for the Herald, and then you've got to pay for the altar. Put the Herald on top of it, which is then not buffing the rest of the army with the bonus of strength. And then very quickly you notice that, well, he's not going to last very long on there. With the new Lookout Sir rules, you've got to keep another unit next to him. So by the time that you're actually investing on the points for this unit, you're spending, close to 100 points for the thing, about 50 odd for the Herald, so you're about 150 points down, and then you've got to give him something to bodyguard him. Are you wanting to spend nearly 200 odd points for a bonus to the attacks? I doubt it. This is something I'm gonna sort of say right now is probably the biggest issue with Fortifications. I think they're too expensive for what they do. Most of these Fortifications I mentioned are within the range of 50 to 100 points. I can't remember the exact prices of all of them off the top of my head. I don't play with most of these armies. But at the same time, if you're going to provide a buff that requires other units nearby to do stuff or specific things, having them being very expensive isn't likely to be worth it. You could just take another unit. So let's talk about the destructible ones, the ones that actually have a regular profile. Regular profile. You know, they've got movement, sort of. They've got weapon skill, they've got ballistic skill, they've got strength, they've got a toughness. I say they've got all those things. So most of them are dash when you actually look at the profiles, but for the purpose of this, we'll say that they have a profile. They act as per a normal unit. You've got the tide wall sections. You've got like a bunch of them, but they're all the same name. They're the tide wall stuff. You've got the gun battery, you've got the drone point, you've got the other one. I can't remember what the other one's called. There's 3 of them though, and then the Forger ones, but we're not going to talk about the Forger ones. You've got the Tidewall stuff, you've got the Noctilith Crown for Chaos, you have the Eldar Webway Gate, and then finally you have the Tyranid Sporicist. Now, all of those have an actual profile. Hooray! You can do things with them, you can interact with them, they're part of the game. So, what do? Are they worth it? Well, let's start off with the easy one and probably the worst one. Let's talk about the Eldar Webway Gate. All of the different Eldar factions can take it. You want to take it in Dark Eldar? Go for it. You want to take it in Harlequins? Go for it. You want to take it in Craftworlds? Go for it. Ynnari? Go for it. Are you ever going to want to? Probably not. Does it have any damage output? No. So it's a pure support. What's its support ability? Well, when you're deploying units, instead of deploying them, you can say they're going in the Webway Gate. After you can have them arrive from the Webway Gate. It's basically like another deployment edge you can come on from and all that stuff. Great. I don't know why you would ever do that in an army where you have access to different stratagems that allow you to deep strike. Or, you know, the new generic one that allows you to come on from reserve. Or multiple other units that allow you to deep strike normally. I don't know why you would ever bring a scenery feature that allows you to have another way to do something that you kind of have a bunch already. On top of that, the units inside are in an even worse position, because should the building be destroyed, everything inside of it's dead. So why wouldn't you just spend the 1 or 2 command points to put that unit in reserve? Why would you spend the points cost for that building? It looks cool, but it's also huge, so there's no way for the opponent to not really see it. You know, it's probably one of the worst scenery features, to be honest. I think the Orc one or the Knight one could probably fight for that claim, but the Eldar Webway Gate is it's pretty bad. But if we move on to a slightly better one, we have got the Tyranid Sporicist. Now that one has a distinct advantage over a lot of the others in that you can deep strike it, which is pretty cool. You know, you can deep strike it and it has guns. It has lots of guns. Have up to, I think it's 5 Death Spitters or 5 Barbed Stranglers, although it could be the monstrous ones. I can't remember which way around it is off the top of my head. But it gets 5 of either of those. It's a shame it's not very good at shooting them. Hits on 5s, yeah, sure. It increases the range of synapse. I think it produces a Spore Mine a turn, or a group of Spore Mines a turn, I should say. And yeah, that's it. That's all it does. Don't get me wrong, it's cool, it's decent, it actually can fight back, unlike almost every other fortification. I believe every other fortification in the game has a rule which says it's auto-hit in combat, and that doesn't. And it can fight back in combat as well, because it's a Tyranid beastie. But, well, you know, not to beat a dead horse again, but why would you take it over many of the other Tyranid monsters? That's the issue. It's, again, not worth the points for it. It's got lots of guns, but it's bad at shooting them. It's got combat capability, but it's bad at doing that. And it can't charge, so if the opponent can't fight in combat, they're just going to choose not to. But, you know, what can I say? It's don't get me wrong, it's one of the cool ones. It's probably one of the better ones, sadly to say. But is it worth the points? Again, of those rolls, it doesn't have the damage output, it can't hold objectives, it can't move, can't be defensive, and its support buffs are not great. Then we have the Noctilith Crown. Noctilith Crown is probably one of the really good ones. And that is saying something. It's better than the rest, we'll put it that way. It provides a ever-increasing aura. I believe it starts at 6 inches and increases by 3 inches every turn. And those auras are giving you invuln saves, and I believe it's a debuff to psychers. I think it makes them perils more likely than not. Pretty decent buffs. It's also very expensive. It's very expensive. And the auras are small at the start. I can't remember the exact range, but they're not very big. So, again, it's good. But would I rather bring obliterators? Would I rather bring something else? Which is, again, the issue. It has that support abilities. But is its support abilities great? Personally, I'd give it a go. If you're a Chaos player and you're interested, try them out. In fact, generally, please, try out these fortifications. If you can afford them, but we'll get to that in a moment. You know, if you can have the opportunity to try them out, give them a go. Maybe it turns out that they're actually quite good, and maybe you've just been sleeping on something your entire time. Speaking of, if you have been using these and you turn out that they're really good, please just, tell me in the comments. Tell me that I'm completely full of nonsense and that, you find them great and all that stuff. But from my experience, I don't see them. I don't think I've ever seen them. Even online, you never see them, even as a joke. But who knows? Anyway, let's move on to the Tide Wall. This one's, again, one of the better ones, because it's a vehicle. It's more of a dedicated transport stuff than a scenery feature. It's got pretty good buffs. It's got, buffs by which I mean it can keep the unit inside safe. It's got drones with guns, or the big one has a railgun from memory. But, it has the drone ballistic skill of 5s. It's not very good at hitting. And, if you want to bring a railgun, you're going to bring a broadside or a hammerhead gunship. You're not going to look at the scenery feature and go, yes, that's what I'm going to bring. You just wouldn't. Why would you look at the points for it and go, yes, these seem perfectly even in points? So how would I improve the scenery? Well, there's some obvious ways around it. You've got the very easy route of simply making them cheaper. Because that is just a universal thing about all the fortifications. They are far too expensive for what they do. You can't change the fact they can't move. Changing the fact that they can hold objectives would be a little bit overpowered. So you've got to do the easy one first of all. Make them all cheaper. They're all way too expensive. What else could you do? Well, you need to make their effects larger. Having an aura that's like 6 inches just isn't really good enough for something that can't physically move. If it was, for example, an aura on a hero, let's say, for example, there was a Herald of Khorne that gave all of your stuff within 6 inches plus 1 attack, you would take that in a heartbeat as a Khorne demon player. It'd be brilliant. But the second that it's immobile and you have to spend points to invest in a character on top of it, it just stops working. What else would I do? Well, you need to make the buffs definitely worth it. The Orc buff and the Knight buff is not worth the investment you put into. Making a Knight unable to act for an entire round isn't worth getting a buff. I'd say if you were going to do something like that, make its debuff, make it -1 to hit or something, or half the attacks. Don't make it literally unable to do anything. But I'm sure there are better ways. If you have any particular ways that you think you may improve the scenery, please let me know. And in fact, I would implore you, I'd ask you, give them a go. I want to try them out, personally. But then you've got the other issue. You've got the other problem that the scenery has, that probably the biggest. It's expensive. Price-wise, it's expensive. Look at a lot of the fortification scenery out there. It's very expensive for what it is. It's beautiful, it's large, it's impressive. But if you're spending that much money on it, you're not going to want to try it out. You're not going to want to play test it. You're not going to want to see what it does. And it's very difficult to proxy those sorts of things because they're so unique compared to everything else. So if you can try them out, please do. Heck, even have a look at them. I'm sure most people just skip the fortification when they're looking in their book. But, you know, maybe that's just me. Let me know if I'm completely wrong. That's the other thing. I want to be completely wrong about this. I want to see people, like, tell me, yeah, I take fortifications all the time. That'd be great. I'd love to see that. But with that in mind, thank you very much for watching. As I say, I want this video to be more of a discussion than me just going through my thought process and saying that it's a fact. I want people to, I want people to talk to me in the comments. Tell me what you think about fortifications. Is it something that you just skipped, or is it something you've genuinely thought about and you've genuinely been like, I really want to take this stuff? But is it just bad? Do you just not feel like it? Is it too expensive to pay the price of admission for, never mind the points? I don't know, let me know. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you next time. Until next time, remember, stay optimistic, and most importantly, stay safe. Bye for now.